The first time I found the receipt, it was for $12,000. It was from a place called the Gilded Cage, tucked into the pocket of Mark's suit jacket like a secret. I was sorting the laundry, my hands still smelling of the lemon-scented detergent I'd used for 20 years. The paper was thick, expensive. It listed a bar tab, a dinner for two, Wagyu steak, a bottle of Dom Perignon, and a line item that simply read, private room. My heart didn't hammer, my breath didn't catch. A strange, cold stillness settled over me. This wasn't the first secret, it was just the first one with a price tag. Mark, my husband of 22 years, was a charismatic man. He was the face of our life, the one who gave rousing toasts at parties, who remembered everyone's name, who could sell a ketchup popsicle to a woman in white gloves. I was the architecture that held him up, the silent partner. I ran our life like a small, efficient corporation. I managed the investments, paid the bills, scheduled the contractors, remembered the birthdays, and made sure there was always milk in the fridge. I was the one who'd quietly navigated the financial crash of '08, moving our assets while he gave confident interviews about market resilience. I was the reason our children's college funds were robust, the reason we owned our beautiful home outright. He brought in the grand, sweeping income. I ensured it didn't leak out through 1,000 tiny holes of disorganization and tax inefficiency. I looked at the receipt again. The Gilded Cage. It sounded like a strip club, but the prices suggested something more refined, more dangerous. I did what I always did when faced with a problem. I analyzed. I didn't confront him. Confrontation was a messy, emotional business, and Mark was a master of turning emotion into a weapon. He'd call me paranoid, accuse me of not trusting him, of being ungrateful for the life he provided. He'd spin it until I was the one apologizing. So I began my own audit. That night, while he slept the untroubled sleep of a man who believed himself invincible, I sat in my home office, the one he jokingly called Mission Control. I logged into our joint bank accounts first. Nothing obvious. Then I accessed the business accounts for his consulting firm called Apex Holdings. I had the passwords. I'd set up the accounting software. I was the one who reconciled the books every quarter for the CPA. It was there in the labyrinth of corporate finances that I found the first thread. A series of wire transfers, disguised as vendor payments to a company called Apex Holdings. They were large, irregular sums, 40,000, 25,000, 60,000. They've been happening for over a year. I cross-referenced the dates. They never coincided with a business acquisition or a major project launch. Apex Holdings had a bank account in the Cayman Islands. The cold stillness inside me began to harden into something else, something sharp and focused. This wasn't just an affair. An affair would have been a wound to the heart. This was a threat to the very foundation I had spent my life building. This was a termite gnawing at the supports of our family's future. I created a new, encrypted folder on my laptop. I named it Project Sphinx, and I began to dig. For 2 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was Laura Walsh, devoted wife, PTA mom, organizer of charity galas. I packed lunches, kissed my husband goodbye, and smiled at the neighbors. By night, I was a forensic accountant, a digital ghost haunting the corridors of my husband's secret life. I discovered that the Gilded Cage was not a strip club. It was an underground, high-stakes poker club. The $12,000 receipt was a losing night, a small losing night. The wires to Apex Holdings were his way of funding his play. He was siphoning money from his own company, laundering it through a shell corporation, and losing it at a felt-covered table. The scale of it was breathtaking. In the last 18 months, he had lost over $800,000. I felt the floor drop out from under me. $800,000. That was our daughter Chloe's entire college fund. That was the money I'd set aside for our retirement villa in Tuscany, a dream we'd whispered about in bed for years. That was the safety net I had woven thread by careful thread for our family. The anger that rose in me was not a hot, screaming fury. It was a glacial, all-consuming rage. He wasn't just betraying me. He was betraying Chloe and our son Jake. He was gambling away their security, their futures, for the thrill of the game. I dug deeper. I used a private investigator I'd hired using cash from the household budget, another secret tucked into my ledger. His name was Ben, a quiet, efficient man who asked no questions. Within a week, he had photos. Mark entering a nondescript building in the financial district late at night. Mark laughing with men who had the cold eyes of sharks. Mark looking haggard and desperate in the early morning light, a look I'd never saw at home. Ben also confirmed my darkest suspicion. "He's in deep, Mrs. Walsh," he said over a pay-as-you-go phone. "He's borrowed from some very unpleasant people, the kind who don't send reminder letters." The final piece fell into place on a Tuesday. Mark was supposed to be in Chicago for a conference. I'd even printed his boarding pass. But a gut feeling, that same instinct that had saved us from bad investments before, told me to check the GPS on his phone, a feature I'd enabled for family safety. He wasn't in Chicago. He was at a casino in Atlantic City. I called his hotel in Chicago. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the clerk said. Mr. Walsh did have a reservation, but he canceled it 2 days ago." The lies were not just about money. They were a second life, a parallel existence running alongside our own, fueled by deceit and desperation. That night, he came home, full of fabricated stories about his productive meetings. He kissed my cheek, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. I looked at him, at this stranger I had built a life with, and I knew. The time for silent observation was over. I didn't confront him, not directly. I laid a trap. I created a fake email account, posing as a representative from Apex Holdings. I sent him an email stating that due to internal auditing, there would be a temporary hold on all fund transfers for the next 72 hours. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Mark became a caged animal. He was jumpy, irritable. He snapped at the kids over nothing. He spent hours locked in his study, on the phone, his voice a low, frantic murmur. I heard the words, "loan," "extension," and "you'll get your money." He was being squeezed, and desperate men make mistakes. His mistake was going for the nuclear option. 2 days after my fake email, I saw him log into our joint investment portfolio, the one I managed. He was trying to initiate a wire transfer for $200,000 to an account I didn't recognize. He was going to raid our children's future to pay his gambling debts. That was the line, the uncrossable line. I let the transfer request sit in the pending queue. Then, that evening, as we sat down to a dinner I had cooked, his favorite, beef bourguignon, I decided the performance was over. "Chloe, Jake," I said, my voice calm, "would you give your father and me a moment? Go finish your homework upstairs." They grumbled, but they went. The dining room was suddenly very quiet. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall was like a heartbeat. Mark looked up from his plate, annoyed. "What is it, Laura? I have calls to make." "I know about the gilded cage," I said. He froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Then the mask of charm snapped into place. He gave a dismissive laugh. "Oh, for God's sake, that was a client dinner, a very important one. I told you about it." I didn't blink. "I know about Apex Holdings and the $847,000 you've lost in the last 18 months. The color drained from his face. The charm evaporated, replaced by a swift, ugly fury. "You've been spying on me? You've been going through my accounts?" "Our accounts," I corrected him, my voice still quiet. "And the company accounts that I keep, the ones you're trying to use to wire $200,000 to a loan shark named Anatoly Petrov." His jaw dropped. He hadn't known I had the name. Ben had gotten it for me. The last piece of the puzzle. He slammed his fist on the table, making the china rattle. You have no idea what you're talking about. You think you're so smart with your little spreadsheets and your budgets. This is the real world, Laura. This is how business is done. This isn't business, Mark, I said, standing up. I felt taller than I had in years. This is an addiction. This is you setting our family on fire to keep yourself warm. He stood up too, leaning across the table, his face contorted. You ungrateful bitch! After everything I've given you, this house, this life, you'd be nothing without me. It was the line he always used, but this time, it shattered against the armor of my knowledge. No, Mark, I said, and my voice finally held the ice I felt inside. You would be nothing without me. You'd have been bankrupt 5 years ago. The IRS would own this house. You have no idea how the money works. You only know how to spend it. And now, you've spent it all. I walked to my office and came back with a single sheet of paper. I slid it across the table to him. It was a list of every transaction, every wire transfer, every loan, with dates and amounts. At the bottom, in bold, was the total: $847,300. This is what your real world looks like. He stared at the paper, and I watched the fight go out of him. He crumpled, sinking back into his chair, his head in his hands. He looked old and broken. What are you going to do? He whispered, his voice hollow. That depends on you, I said. The first thing you are going to do is call Chloe and Jake down here, and you are going to tell them the truth. The aftermath was a special kind of hell. Telling the children was the most painful thing I have ever done. Watching their faces, seeing their hero worship of their father turn to confusion, then betrayal, was an agony I will never forget. Jake, at 16, was furious. Chloe, at 18, wept silent, heartbroken tears. Mark, stripped of his lies, was a pitiful figure. He confessed everything in a stumbling, shame-filled monologue. He was going to rehab, a real one, for gambling addiction. I had already researched the best facilities. But rehab was the easy part. The hard part was the debt. The next morning, I put on my best suit, the one I wore for board meetings I never got credit for, and I went to war. I met with the lawyer, a fierce woman named Evelyn Reed, and we began the process of legally separating our finances. I filed a police report for the embezzlement from his own company, not to put him in jail, but to create a legal record that would protect the remaining assets from his creditors. Then I did the hardest thing of all. I met with Anatoly Petrov. He was not a movie gangster. He was a small, neat man in a tailored suit, sitting in a quiet coffee shop. His eyes were flat and dead, like a shark's. Mrs. Walsh, he said, a pleasure. The debt is $847,000, I said, my voice not wavering. I am prepared to offer you $200,000 in a single, final payment, in cash, today. He smiled, a thin, bloodless line. The debt, with vigorish, is over $1 million. I am not a charity. I slid a manila folder across the table. In this folder is evidence of your operation: names, dates, account numbers. It is with my lawyer. If anything happens to me or my family, or if you do not accept my offer, it goes to the FBI, the IRS, and the Wall Street Journal. You will lose far more than $800,000. His smile vanished. The dead eyes flickered with something. Surprise. Then cold respect. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time, he saw the silent partner, the architect, the one who held the real power. He opened the folder, glanced at the contents, and then back at me. He gave a short, sharp nod. 250, he said. 200, I repeated. He was silent for a long moment. Then he stood up. The money, by 5 p.m. He walked out of the coffee shop without a backward glance. I sat there, my hands trembling under the table. I had just negotiated with the loan shark, and I had won.